insane level of
that's
just public perception.
But that's common. And then all you have to do is have someone write, an alien harvest like Linda Moulton Howe, or you have people write abduction books. And what's interesting, the very people who are setting this up will guide those victims. And they are victims. I'm not saying these abduction people aren't real. They have been victimized. But they haven't been taken by extraterrestrials. They've been taken by covert human special operations made to look alien.
Right.
It's a look-alike, right? So those programs, they sell, and the media, which is as corrupt as anything you can imagine, the legacy media, a lot of those people, they're, like I will be absolutely not only shadow banned, but banned to tell the truth on a lot of media. Whereas if you're going forward telling a lie, boom, you're on 60 Minutes. Boom, you're on. That's true, because the big media is, I think, probably more corrupt than any other institution in the United States or the world, in being controlled by these interests.
Yeah, but how do they? I understand how the media is controlled by advertising dollars, but how do you think they're controlled by these rogue military aerospace companies?
Money and control, payment.
They're backdooring money to them.
They're Knox. They have a non-official cover. By day and public persona, they're a media person. They're actually working with the agency or some other entity that's part of this compartmented shadow government. And, I know people like that. I mean, probably if I had taken the money, I would have been one of those guys, right?
Yeah.
So, that's how that works. And it makes, one of the problems with Washington is everyone's so busy doing a million different things. They have 99 things to do every day, and this thing, as you pointed out at the beginning, and you're right, is such a confusing mess of conflicting information that they just go, I don't want to hear it. It is too complicated, right? But that is part of the reason they've made it complicated. It's obfuscating. It hides it.
Yeah, exactly.
By making it just incomprehensible.
It's impossible to know what's real.
We have to make it understandable and kind of. I liken this to the epiphany moment in The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy and whoever, the Scarecrow, and they pull back the curtain. Yeah. And there's this old crudmudgeon pulling the levers, right?
Yeah.
That's what this is. So, part of what we have to do is not just say, here's the evidence for NHI craft and people, extraterrestrial craft and people, but here's the other part of it. Here's the dominant information, disinformation, that's out in ufology, in the media, in documentaries, in films and books, has actually been staged by the very people trying to keep it secret, so that you're looking over here and not the truth. And they're very good at doing this, Danny. They're extremely good at it.
One of my favorite stories was from Annie Jacobson in her Area 51 book, where she interviewed the CIA pilots who were test flying the first jet planes over the Air Force Base, and they said they purposely brought gorilla masks in the cockpit for, in the chance that they flew by a civilian aircraft, they put the gorilla mask on, so that they're poisoning that story already. So if the guy goes to the bar later, goes, dude, I saw a monkey flying a jet plane.
Well, and the early abductions in the late 50s, early 60s, they had the man-made UFOs, and they had some guys very short stature, or not quite looking normal, and they're kind of like Hollywood. You can make a guy look like Darth Vader or whatever. That they had that stagecraft, and it was incredibly convincing. Because even now you look at one of our witnesses, whistleblowers who came forward a year and a half ago, Stephen Digna. He was at Fort Irwin, California in 2000, and he was called out by some Raytheon guys to look at some objects that were out over the range, and they had to cancel their live fire exercises because of this. And it was a triangular, not quite equilateral, more of a pointed triangular craft, and they didn't know he picked up a pair of night vision scopes. And he looked at it, and he saw the detail on it. And then he saw that there were several others that were holographic projections of the real one. And so it looked like there was a fleet of them.
Yeah.
And this is how you stage a fake alien attack.
Yeah. They had this was all part of that declassified Northwoods thing where they were trying to stage a fake invasion over Cuba.
Well, no, this was a separate incident, but it's very similar
to that. Yeah.
It's very similar, and so they were very upset that he figured that out, right? And the Raytheon guys, a few days later, abducted him and his wife on coming back from a movie, back to the base on this road out in California, remote road. And anyone who would have seen that craft and what happened would have sworn it was a alien vehicle, and it's Raytheon. Now, he suffered terrible damages. He's very damaged. He's very sick. So, that is what happens if you get too close to the truth. And he's an incredibly sweet man, very courageous. He's totally telling the truth. But I would say if you took 1 million people on Earth and showed them that craft, that Raytheon object craft in 2000, this is 25 years ago, right?
Right.
I don't think one person would think that it was man-made. And this is a problem for the National Security Council and the president, because everyone assumes that what I'm telling you, they know. They don't. If you've seen the documentary Unacknowledged, you know more about this subject than virtually anyone in the U.S. Congress, except the bad apples who are on the payroll of the shadow secret government.
Right. Well,
So this is a problem. I mean, if you want to live in a free society, in a democracy, you can't have something this important, completely ignored by your elected officials, right?
And also the benefit of having so much bullshit out there is if the truth does get out, it doesn't fucking matter, because what are the chances that they're going to pick that as being the truth?
Well, that's now you're very smart, because you just hit the nail in the coffin. What keeps me up at night
and that's why I don't trust any of these whistleblowers, because I don't think.
Well, I know the ones I know, and now here's someone like Mr. Grush. He was telling 100% the truth until he started telling tall tales that were being fed to him by Lou Elizondo, right? About how the aliens had blown up villages in, I don't know, South America or someplace. That was
Elizondo told him that?
Yeah. So he fell into that disinformation trap along with the information trap. But a lot of people do that. And why?
Right.
Because those guys will say, hey, I can get you a $10 million book or movie deal, and I can get you on 60 Minutes. So, there are advantages to going with those folks as opposed to doing it, let's call it clean. Because doing it clean is a hard path. I mean, it's been a big struggle for me and my family, and, you have all kinds of problems because of it. But I don't regret it. I mean, I wouldn't do anything different at all. But it's dangerous, and it's very ungratifying. From a personal point of view, nobody would do it, except I feel that this is something, if this doesn't get resolved properly, what Wernher von Braun warned about, right? He said, look, the whole plan is to stage an alien threat so we can unite the world around this sort of fascist, totalitarian, militaristic sort of thing. It's like the movie Independence Day, right? Will Smith, let's go kick alien butt. You see the Arabs and everybody in the world united to fight the aliens. So that's right out of CIA PSYOP scripting. And guess what? 99% of legacy ufology, that's the narrative. They're the good aliens and the bad ones, so it's Star Wars, right? It's all that narrative. And I go, at least members of Congress are saying, look, if these civilizations were hostile, given that their technologies are hundreds of thousands of years more advanced than ours, we'd be gone. We'd be a charcoal briquette floating through space. Now, do they have? This is not to say, I'm not naive. This is not to say that those civilizations don't have some self-interest. Because what would you think? I mean, just put yourself in the shoes and through the eyes of an ET. You come across this planet, and in a few decades, it goes from, muskets and machine guns to thermonuclear weapons to
pointing at the heads of each other,
to very advanced electromagnetic weapons, including the so-called scalar ones that are knocking ET craft now. And then the same group going off the reservation of any controls reverse engineers your ET technologies and start using it against you. Got it? That's the crisis that no one's talking about. Because and Jake and people like him will say, it's at the point now where they just say AT, the advanced technologies humans have. to most people on Earth would be indistinguishable from an ET vehicle or NHI craft. And there's a big risk there because, number one, they could stage a false flag attack and everyone would think it was alien, which is what their plan is. That's what the drones were all about, by the way. I mean, Mr. Trump got that wrong when his press secretary commented on that. We know what that was. That was that was a psyop.
It was a psyop?
100%.
Coordinated by who?
By the same people who are trying to be sure that when this comes out this year and next, that it's done with the specter of fear. We don't know. People look at the skies. Oh, I'm afraid.
They look just like hobby drones. Like they looked like they weren't moving crazy at all.
Oh no, I know a team that was under contract with Lockheed Martin that has some images of some of this stuff, and some of them are pretty amazing. And some of the daytime ones that they've captured. Now they're not extraterrestrial; they're our advanced stuff. But again, and some have said, well, these are originating from China. But that's a misnomer because this shadow government entity is transnational. You can label whatever country you want; it doesn't matter. It operates. When I was the first time I went to meet with the latest efforts about 3 years ago at the Senate Intelligence Committee SCIF, and I went in there and I said, "See that map of the world? Erase all the geopolitical boundaries, like the boundary between Canada and the United States or Mongolia and China or whatever.
Yeah.
This organization, the world is their oyster. They don't care about that. So now, the truth is, people like Jake Barber and his guys are patriots who got stuck in that system, as I said, and they deserve a clean path out, a safe path out. And that's what has to happen. That's got to happen from the Congress and from the president's executive orders, which I've seen some drafts of those. And
so yeah,
and they're in here. Their recommendations are in here for what those need to be, and they need to be done yesterday.
We kind of just got really sidetracked down a crazy rabbit hole after we started talking about Jake and Michael Herrera's situation, where they were extracting these people out.
Yeah, and he's the only guy who I've ever heard about who saw something like that and was not killed. He's
really?
the only survivor. His guys, yes, absolutely. It's a miracle he wasn't killed. And I told him that. I said, "You have no idea how rare it is for someone like you, a kid, 20 years old, seeing something like that, for them not to just erase you."
So yeah, I remember from that story, Jake was like saying, the guys were saying, "Should we smoke these guys? Should we smoke these guys?" Blah blah blah, and they ended up not doing that.
No.
So they're taking these children from foreign countries, these underdeveloped places,
and adults,
and adults. But the primary reason is because they are out of a civilized environment. They're not in like a metropolitan city. They're not around technology all the time. They're in a completely native environment, and they're eating, I don't know, maybe unprocessed foods, natural foods, so they're more connected to nature somehow, and that somehow makes them more in tuned to this psychic consciousness, the psionic stuff that he's talking about. And they put them in this program, give them dopamine drugs, and hook them up to all kinds of technology, and use them to summon these eggs. This is what he said. Summon the eggs.
Well, not just the eggs. It's all different types of crap. But it's not. It's more than just summon.
Okay.
So let me unpack this a little more.
Okay.
Years ago, you heard about this weird-looking drone that kind of looked like a UFO that the Iranians were able to break into its guidance system and land, and then study to reverse engineer it.
I never heard about this.
Oh, it was all in the media. So, but if you look into that,
Steve, maybe you could find it. But what year?
I can't remember. It was in the last
Iranian drone that was caught.
Ours that they intercepted and hijacked it basically by wire.
Iran did?
Yes, and landed it at a base in Iran, and then studied the reverse engineering.
You got to find this shit, dude.
Yeah, but that it was a drone. It was not a UFO. But
right.
It looked weird. It was a very unusual shape, and now imagine being able to do that with this instead of guide by wire, right?
Right there, U.S. drone recovered by Iran, 2011.
I'm sure there've been multiple.
Ooh, here we go.
Yeah, see what a strange-looking one.
Sophisticated spy planes. U.S. intelligence is spying intensely on Iranian sites believed to be developing nuclear weapons and long-range
Recovered by Iran, 2011.
I'm sure there have been multiple.
Ooh, here we go.
Yeah, see what a strange looking
most
one.
Sophisticated spy planes. U.S. intelligence is spying
Can you full screen it?
intensely on Iranian sites believed to be developing nuclear weapons and long-range missiles. Bob Orr tells us an unmanned U.S. drone did vanish over the weekend.
The secret stealth drone, nicknamed the Beast of Kandahar, is one of America's most sophisticated intelligence tools. For the past 4 years, the RQ-170 has flown high-altitude surveillance missions over the battlefields in Afghanistan.
Okay, I
and
get
its
it.
border
All right,
with
so here's
Pakistan.
my point in this is that this sort of nonsense happens all the time.
Yeah.
What my point of it is, they were able to break into the encrypted, hardened guidance system, because these are all flown, a lot of them out of Nellis or bases out in the desert underground, and they're unmanned, but they're on the other side of the world. But they were able to break into that system, the command and control guidance, and land it. They didn't crash
Now,
it.
did they do that with this consciousness stuff?
No, they didn't. I'm using this as an analogy if I can get through my sentence. So that's an analogy. Now imagine having an interstellar vehicle, an HI craft, and their technologies are consciousness, thought interfacing. So you train these people to basically hack into their guidance system when no one's looking, and you hijack it. Instead of landing it, you bring it over to an area. Sometimes you can land the ET craft, but often what they do is they hit it with an electromagnetic pulse weapon, and it either is disabled and falls to the ground, or it's blown to pieces. Now, what I was getting ready to tell you is that in these same areas, they'll put up a TFR, which is basically a temporary flight restriction area over an area of airspace. If there is a civilian aircraft that strays into that, and they're using these electromagnetic pulse weapons, they will blow the innocent civilian Cessna out of the sky. And I know this for a fact. Sometimes the electromagnetic pulse goes outside the TFR and hits a totally aircraft that was trying to stay out of the TFR. So now we have over the continental United States a real threat to air traffic, which are always blaming it on the aliens. No, the real threat to air traffic are the man-made UFOs and these sort of operations because these are not always done over permanent flight restriction areas like a top secret Air Force base.
Yeah.
They're done in these other places, right? So this is a real problem. I brought it up to officials in Washington. And what's astounding to me, I want to vent a little bit here. I've been blowing the whistle on this nonsense since 93. And you always wonder, I think we have something called the FBI or law enforcement. Now, we can prove through our direct witnesses kidnapping, murder, treason, killing innocent civilians like I just described, embezzlement of U.S. federal dollars into black projects without oversight and oversight of the president or Congress. On and on. Half the federal penal code is being violated by this organization. And it's precisely where is the Congress and the White House and the FBI. So now that we have a new administration and a new Congress, and this is all beginning to come out, I think that the public listening need to contact their senators and House member and the White House and say, look, we need to get this resolved, but you need to enforce the law and protect, the American democracy, but also the American public. And that's not happening yet. And so that group goes unchecked while these terrible atrocities keep going. Now, what I would like to see happen is that those operations get wound down peacefully, because there's as I mentioned earlier, a glide path out to basically transform that mess into something that's forward-looking. And I think all the whistleblowers I know, that's what they want to see, because an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. And if you go kinetic, if you go into a violent confrontation with an organization that have assets that are way beyond anything, as Admiral Wilson said, that they can deploy, it's not going to be good.
Yeah,
I mean,
could you
It's a suicide mission.
What would it be like to go to war with one of these organizations?
I know exactly, and now I'm advising a group that has been asked to do exactly that if it comes to it, and I don't want to talk about operational details about it.
A U.S. military group?
I won't talk about what agency or what entity it is.
Okay.
But it's a SAP, it's TSSCI, Top Secret Special Compartment Information. And I've been asked to provide everything I can, and I will, and I have been. I've been doing this for 30-some years. But now we have a critical mass of people who have details. I haven't even talked about some of the whistleblowers that are still behind the curtain that could be brought in and who know of multiple places. There was one gentleman who was about to come forward, and he got threatened, but he was read into 18 unacknowledged special access projects dealing with this. He had baseline clearance across 18 of them in a top secret Pentagon office. So we have people like that. They're living. They need to be protected. He's afraid of not only being killed, but his pension being erased because he signed an 80-year non-disclosure agreement that said that if he ever discussed any of this, that he would lose his freedom, but also his pension. And he's getting up in years. He has some war injuries. He's a hero. And I can't, what I never do is just shove someone like that out. I mean, I'm a doctor, so if it's like a doctor-patient confidentiality. But at a certain point, the people who can protect people like him have a legal obligation. I will say that given what is in here, that the unredacted part, what people can get is has some redacted, like this guy's name's redacted. But there is a dereliction of duty here if they don't deal with this. And I think the American public, they need to hear. I've had so many members of Congress and the Senate say, we really need to hear from our constituents on this, right? Now, people are so apathetic. They just think everything happens by itself. No, it doesn't. You got to create a movement. So I'm sort of an activist that way. You got to have people say, look, we want this resolved. We want this fixed yesterday. But we also want to bring out the technologies that would save the biosphere and eliminate poverty. So imagine, I don't think the things that are flying at 200,000 miles per hour should come out right now that are man-made, because that's a missile delivery system. You don't want every terrorist in Mogadishu having that to, boom, do something over downtown LA. But the things that would sit on your table here and run this building from what's called the 0 point or quantum vacuum energy, that needs to come out. And that would then give us a civilization without pollution and without poverty within certainly your lifetime, maybe not mine because I'm almost 70 in June, but it would be an amazing leap forward. And so I think my 4 daughters and 12 grandkids would actually have a planet to live on instead of it just being ruined by these 1800s technologies we're using, So that is the big peace dividend. Let's call it the big peace dividend of this all coming out, Dan, is that imagine a civilization without pollution and where your energy needs are met without cost. Once you have be like a heat pump or something smaller, provide all the energy for your car or your business or your house, and with no bill, no electric bill. The problem with that, and this is what Patrick Bet-David said the other day to me, he said, no one wants that to come out because there goes trillions of dollars in assets, right? All the public utilities don't need them. All the oil, gas, coal, nuclear power, don't need them.
Right.
An electric plug-in car like a Tesla, don't need it.
Sure.
So, well, you could use the electric motor part, but though 900 pounds of lithium-ion batteries,
the idea is like
don't need it.
Right.
Yeah.
Conventional transportation and petroleum industries that prop up our economy are going to be all of a sudden irrelevant if we have some crazy 0 point anti-gravity technology.
Well, again, the anti-gravity technology really can't come out right yet, but the other can and
The
should.
0 point energy.
Yeah, the 0 point, what I call the station, basically a power plant that generates energy. But you don't want something that's flying at that kind of maneuverability in the hands of unstable, failed states and whatnot. Now, I always point out to people, the worst people in the world have that technology now because these are rogue shadow government operators that are doing all these terrible things. And I think they have more terrible things they're planning to do, which I don't want to go into. But I think we ain't seen nothing yet from that crowd.
I wanted to ask you about Roswell, specifically because I've talked to Annie Jacobson about Roswell, and she wrote about it in her book. I'm sure you're familiar with what she said. There was an EG&G engineer that was a source for her, and he told her that it was a craft piloted by, remote controlled by the Soviet Union, and it had deformed children in there that were surgically altered by Mengele, or the Nazi Mengele, yeah. And it was crashed here to basically sow chaos. And she asked him, she's like, why the hell wouldn't you say this? This would make them look terrible, and it would be great for us if we, were able to expose this. And they would be completely humiliated on the world stage. And he said, because we started doing the same exact thing that they were doing.
Well, I'm not so sure of that, because we have interviewed people who are now deceased who handled the bodies, and they most certainly were not that. So now, have there been events like that? Yes, and we've confirmed that Russia and probably China have these same technologies. And have they done stagecraft and hoax things? Very likely. But see, a one-source account, I know the EG&G folks. One of the G's is Greer. I'm not related, just on the record. But, again, a one-source, no. But, and if you look at the people who were there at the retrieval site of the one that was not blown to smithereens, that was no man-made object. But in 1947, the only thing we had that would have been electrogravitic were ones that were unstable. So the what was called the disc that we brought over from Nazi Germany at the end of the war, that was not stable. And if you look at some of the old UFO home movies, and you see it looks like they're like falling like a leaf, like this.
Yeah.
Those are early man-made ones that didn't have the gyro, let's say, or the stable. They had not mastered the gravity control. That was 54, late 1954. So those craft would be very not that stable. But they were man-made. But if you look on the inside of them, like what's called the ARV that Brad Sorensen saw,
Yeah.
and Mark McCandlish, who's passed away, illustrated for us, and got the sort of good concept of the schematics. All the interior components, and this is late 50s, early 60s, were Mercury era components when you looked at it. Now, it was electrogravitic. It had gone out into space before we landed on the moon. But it wasn't interstellar. And certainly, if it came to ground, it would be obvious it was man-made components, like right away. Mm-hmm. So I point out to people, one of the big confusions here is that, and it makes it easy once you understand there's the man-made and there's the non-human ET. But if you don't, and in here is a number of craft that are illustrated, and they're side by side, where you see a man-made one versus an ET.
Yeah.
But I will say,
Can I see that one?
well, I'd have to we'd be flipping around. But
Was Roswell man-made, or was it ET?
that the one that's the famous case, and I think there may have been some cover cases that are mixed up. The 1945 White Sands event and that Roswell event were ET. There were, obviously, if you're out in that area, this is where you would be testing your prototype. So if we already had, remember, the Beefhill Brown effect from the 1920s to 40s, and then we get the Nazi disc that was brought over by the billionaire Paul Mellon and General Patton and Allen Dulles, and it was a lot more advanced than anything we had in terms of gravity stability. So, and that's 45. So you can imagine in the 40s into the early 50s, there had been a number of these that would malfunction, go down. They wouldn't want people to know that we're working on that technology, and there would be love for people to think it was alien or ET.
Right.
So I think that, again, when you start getting into this sort of puzzle palace of information, disinformation, you have to first have a sort of a guidebook. And I liken this to being a doctor and having what we call differential diagnosis. So, someone comes in with chest pain. So a stupid doctor is going to say, oh, it's automatically a heart attack. when it could be dozens of things. It could be a dissecting thoracic aneurysm. It could be pleurisy. It could be a pulmonary embolus. It could be a strained muscle. So I think what's happening with the UFO subculture, they try to make everything one thing, and it isn't. It's several things going on simultaneously and being mixed up deliberately by very masterful counterintelligence and disinformation folks. Yeah. And they're very good at it.
I want to talk about the disinformation stuff and the Elizondo stuff, but I got to take a leak real quick, so
Sure.
we'll pause real quick.
Yep, sure.
We'll be right back.
Absolutely.
All right, we're back. Sorry, I can't let. I gotta ask you that again. We were just talking about the quiet zone in West Virginia and how you do the CE5 protocols, and you said you let the ETs know that the Earth is armed.
Right. One of the protocols, if you get the app, it's CE5 Contact app. Anybody can get it. And part of the training, and when we're doing these sort of PSI, remote viewing contact, we let them know that they should only appear in any way that is safe and appropriate for that time, place, and group, and that the Earth has a lot of systems that can pick them up when they come out of, let's call it, trans-dimensional space-time into 3D. So if you're let's say you're an ET craft, you could be totally invisible to all sensors because you can shift, let's say, the resonant frequency of that whole craft and everyone. I can shift out of this dimension into a very higher frequency. So it's not 3D, but then it can pop into 3D. This is why people see them materialize and dematerialize. And when they're in the non-3D form, so they're not solid, you're not going to be able to strike them and down them as easily.
Right.
This is why we have so many weird phenomena. You know, it's funny, the CIA has a term, WSFM. It stands for Weird Science and Frickin' Magic. An engineer I know at Northrop Grumman just calls it pure fucking magic, PFM. And so when you start getting into either the high end of the electronics that are man-made or the interstellar extraterrestrial manifestations and phenomena, you're dealing with some very strange stuff, right? And you would expect that, but it's not what people expect when they usually get introduced to this idea. So we make it very clear to these visitors that, you know, there are satellites that have what are called neutrino light detectors on them that started in the 70s that can pick them up when they drop out of, let's call it, trans-dimensional higher frequency into 3D. Boom, it's a signature. So there's a neutrino light scatter that happens. And there are Earth-based sensors, there are space-based, and aircraft. And so they'll pick these objects up, and then they'll then triangulate them and hit them with one of these electromagnetic or scalar weapons. So because we're doing this, it's very different from what was going on that Jake Barber talked about. We're not luring them over so we can hit them and kill them and reverse engineer their stuff. We're doing it as sort of a ambassadors, as it will, as civilian ambassadors from humans to them. So for peaceful contact. We're not doing it to get rich quick and make another widget. So
are there beings inside these things?
Yes, not all of them. I mean, some are unmanned, and some have the equivalent of a android drone that's ET, because you know they know how dangerous Earth is.
And my brain just thinks like, wouldn't these beings that are so advanced, trans-dimensional ETs, don't they have better things to do than to interface with a couple people that are meditating in the middle of nowhere?
No, they don't, because if they're assigned to do something about the situation here, they need a point of contact, right? I mean, stop for a minute. The reason I started this whole project in 1990 was not the Disclosure Project. That was an accidental outgrowth of the main project.
It started with CE5.
It started with CE5 Contact. And the reason for that was that I realized that it was either in complete denial, our society, our media, or most people in the government, or we were targeting them and killing them. There was no one on the Earth setting up, let's call it, a peaceful outreach that would be, let's just say, an ambassador level where you're just willing to be someone who does this out of goodwill to establish the beginnings of a relationship between humans and these other civilizations. And I realized no one was doing that. And so that's why I started this whole organization in 1990. It was not to do the Disclosure Project. I kind of got dragged kicking and screaming into that once I realized that, like most people, they think that the president and the Congress are in control of all these covert programs and they know what's going on. When I realized that how dangerous this organization is that had gone completely off the leash of any oversight, that's when I started doing the Disclosure Project. But that's not what I was mainly interested in.
But you have to warn these transdimensional ETs that they have to be careful for people beaming them out of the sky, right?
We just do it as just a reminder, because we don't want to be responsible for the loss of life, whether it be human or ET. So, I'm a doctor, so above all do no harm, right? I mean, the saying that doctors are supposed to live up to. So we don't want to set up a situation, and so it's not to say we think they're not monitoring this. It's just to remind them, and also don't be so willing to do something in this dimension because we're wanting this, right? Because humans are really wanting. The ones that come on these events with me, they really want to make there are a lot of people who are very pure-hearted about it. They're not all just jerks, right, out there. We have wonderful people, millions of people who have been doing CE5 now. I mean, William Shatner got it and then went up in that space thing, and all these people. And so what we're wanting to do is show these civilizations there's another side of humanity that isn't a warmongering bunch of jerks wanting to blow them out of the sky, right? Mm-hmm. But who is doing that? The State Department? The UN? No. So I liken this to back in the Cold War when there were physicians for social responsibility who were doctors going over to the old Soviet Union to try to create a rapprochement and a dialogue, right? This just take this on cosmic level, so where there should be humans reaching out to these civilizations for not some ulterior motive to get their goodies and get rich or turn them into a weapon system or blow them out of the sky, but because there's an opportunity coming up for humans to be part of a larger cosmic family, or whatever you want to call it.
So what kind of communication are you having when you're summoning these beings?
We don't summon them. The King of England would summon a valet.
What do you call it?
I know Jake uses that term and it's appalling. You should never use that term.
What do you use?
We invite them.
Okay.
You summon your Uber driver, right? I mean, this is disrespectful. It's completely disrespectful.
Okay. Well.
So
then
look. Words matter.
Sure.
Right.
Yes, they
words
do matter.
matter.
I agree.
All right. So what are words? Words are expressions verbally of the thought, and the thought is expression of the consciousness behind it. So we do not call or summon them. We invite them with a sense of the equality that exists between all intelligent life. In other words, even if they're very different from us, they may have much higher IQs, more advanced technologically, but at the level of what Erwin Schrödinger talked about, the singularity of mind, of consciousness, and that's a universal constant. On that level, they're awake, we're awake. And so the light of awareness from my eyes, yours, and ET's, it's the same. Because they've done studies. Consciousness is, in fact, a singularity. It's not divisible.
Sure.
We divide it by our egos, right?
Yeah.
But in reality, on a higher level of understanding, it's a singularity. So that is where we come together. This is why our motto is one universe, one people, that within the universe, at that level of consciousness and mind, we're all one people. And so that's why I don't like the term alien, which means foreign, right? I like the term, people. People say, what do you call it? I say, they're non-human people, they're extraterrestrial people. Now the trick here, and this is where it gets very complicated for some people, is that a lot of people will do something like that and they'll bump into something from another dimension, right? Like an angel or a demon or whatever. But that's not extraterrestrial. So this is where you get into this, Tucker Carlson. He got gaslit by a lot of these intel folks who told them that the aliens are demons. Well, the reason he was gaslit was because they were preying on his valid, Christian beliefs. I'm not questioning that at all. But this sort of cosmology that is known within many traditional circles, they wanted to conflate that with alien. And it's easy to do because that is another special operations capability. And that is to use very powerful electromagnetic systems to create phenomenon like you see at Skinwalker or Bradshaw Ranch. We know how they're doing it. I know who's doing it. I know what the electronics are. Now, there's an innate phenomenon that was there, but then both sites were taken over by covert human black operations.
So this aliens and demons narrative that it seems to be everywhere, where is that coming from, and what is the purpose behind it? What is the motive of it?
It is literally to demonize non-human existence so we can have war. See, everything tracks at the fear factor, right? Everything tracks back to how do you...
Sorry.
How do you create an enemy, right?
Right.
All right. So if you're wanting to aggrandize the military-industrial super complex on a international level, the card that has to be eventually played, which is what Wernher von Braun warned about, will be this alien threat card. And so you can do it in a lot of ways. If you're talking to someone who's religious, relate it to demons. If you're talking to someone who's conventional geopolitical, they're a national security threat or air safety threat.
Right.
If you want to relate it, whatever it is, so they have scripts and narratives to sort of affect. And what they do is they do an analysis of your own psychology and belief system, and they target it. So, and which it was interesting when I was at the Vatican.
There's
years
a flavor of psyop for everyone.
Yes, and it's curated. It's tailored for that.
You're at the Vatican?
And I was at the Vatican some years ago when Pope John Paul was the Pope. I met with Monsignor Balducci. You may have heard of him. He was a senior theologian to the Pope and very interested in this issue of the ETs and UFOs. And ironically, he was also a demonologist at the Vatican. He
I
was.
just had an exorcist in here a couple days ago.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. And of course, not my cup of tea. I mean, whatever fires your rockets. But I was at his apartments overlooking, St. Peter's.
Yeah.
And he's turned to me. He says, neither demons nor angels require flying saucers. And it was such a quaint, succinct way of putting it. And I go, yeah, of course. So he was talking about all this disinformation and fear mongering, because that's how you control a populace. You have to create fear and a narrative, and then you get people to buy into it.
Well, two things. One, have you seen the shit Chris Bledsoe does with the orbs?
I've heard of it. I'm not that familiar with it. I know
summons orbs. Summons a bad word. He invites the orbs.
Yes, but he's also been intercepted by Jim Semivan, who's a CIA operative.
Exactly.
And others.
This is another thing. This is crazy. There's so many layers to this.
I know.
Right?
This.
I know that he has been. The crazy thing about this guy is I had him on the podcast over a year ago, and he is somehow able to invite these orbs, which I've personally witnessed with him on the beach a mile away from here. Me and Steve both. We filmed it. We have the video. It's real. But at the same time, there's CIA, NRO, NASA people coming and visiting him and befriending him and going to his kids' baseball game or football games.
Yep, I know.
And literally, it is almost exactly like the Paul Bennewitz story.
I agree. And here's the problem. Anything that is of an extraterrestrial phenomenon can be simulated by these covert humans. And so all of it, the orbs, the craft, all manner of phenomenon. So people are grossly underestimating covert human capabilities, which is why we go out, and when we're doing CE5 contact with a high index of suspicion and skepticism, it's like, is that ET or is that stagecraft? Because I know in great detail what those capabilities are.
So
so someone who hasn't studied that, and I have the advantage of having debriefed nearly 1,000 of these whistleblowers who have been in corporation. So, but I think this is why I'm trying to share this with the public as succinctly as I can, even though it's a complicated, what my Marine buddies call a clusterfuck of stuff. But it's something that really needs to be unpacked and understood so that people aren't tricked, right? So so any event that happens, I always go, well, you have to have it in your differential diagnosis or in your comparison. Was it something from another dimension that's not extraterrestrial, or a man-made, or a little more complicated subset, man-made extra-dimensional, where you could set up a stimulation by a man-made electronic system that, let's just say, tickles some other dimension and brings something into this dimension. Humans can do that. Human covert physicists that I've worked with have done that.
So how do you explain this guy being able to bring these light balls around him and bring them around? And like I was sat on the beach with him and his daughter for like 2 hours. Me and Steve saw this thing that was not a plane it came out of the horizon.
Right.
Went that way, back that way, and then just fizzled out into nowhere.
Right.
And he posts these all over his Instagram all the time. Like
I
that.
know.
Like I understand.
I don't know. See, I haven't been with him to be able to discern.
Yeah.
It's like the old commercial. Is it real or is it Memorex? Back from their Memorex
Right.
tapes. Is it endogenous ET? In other words, original ET, or is it originating from somebody piggybacking on him, right, or using that? I don't know, and so I don't know the gentleman.
I'm just saying, have you ever heard anything similar to that?
Oh, sure. We've had in fact, I was up on our land in Virginia, near Hot Springs, Virginia. I believe it was October or November, and we were up at about 3,000 feet. And I was there. We had a buddy, and we made a campfire, and I was doing a little meditation, and there were exactly what you described, about 15 or 20 of them that emerged and came over and below the crest in about a 40-minute period or 40-minute period. There were more than a dozen. And I'm like, okay, I'm going, oh my God, they just kept going. But so, we have very similar phenomenon happen.
Yeah.
But I also know that you can stagecraft that if you're a special operations group with technologies. And this is not to try to discourage people from doing CE5 contact. I'm just saying there has to be a higher level of education and understanding. We're doing a cruise in the Caribbean April 6th to the 12th, where it's full. There's 200 people. We'll be up on this big deck out in the middle of the ocean for a number of nights. But we're going to webinar it if people want to tune in, and we're going to do this whole CE5 contact in the middle of the. I've never done it. I've always wanted to do it in the middle of the ocean.
What island?
Oh, we're going all over. It's some big cruise liner that we're reserving.
Oh, it's like a legit cruise ship.
Yeah, it's like 3,100 people, but we have 200, and we're going to have the upper deck cordoned off. We'll be doing this late at night.
Wow.
It'll be way fun. I've never done it. It's an experiment. We'll see what happens.
So I still have so many questions that are still on this topic. Number one, why do you think so many spooks are so interested in him and trying to push this idea, encourage him?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert in that case. I don't know the man or his family.
Well, just let's hypothetically let's say it's somebody else, right? Somebody else who has some crazy ability, right? Why would those specific people be so interested in a person like that?
Well, because it's the same reason why the psionic operation teams are interested in people who have the innate capability, right? And they want to see what they're doing, how they're doing it. They may want to intercept what they're doing and confuse the picture by staging some hoaxed events with real ones. It's not like either or. You have to think about how these guys would think. And what that motivation ultimately is, I have no idea. I just know there's some very bad actors swirling around the gentleman.
I'm going to write the name down on this iPad. I'm going to show it to you because I don't want to say this guy's name on the podcast because it'll get this podcast shadow banned. And I want to see if you know who he is. Steve, blur it out or don't show it.
I can't see it. No.
You don't know that name?
No.
Okay.
No. Anyway, I get shadow banned all the time.
Yeah, I know.
It's although it's funny. I was on a conference call with a bunch of tech people. Said, "Oh, that's a myth. Nobody gets shadow banned." I said,
Oh, it definitely happens.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
Definitely
it
happens. And
definitely
it happens to the UFO topic, which is very odd.
Yeah. Oh no, it's not at all. I mean, if you think about go back to that 1950 document, it's the biggest secret in the history of the United States, exceeding the secrecy of the development of the hydrogen bomb. So, the idea that the high end of the intelligence community trying to keep this secret wouldn't sanitize information and the other naivete about most people now is that those interests are not only penetrating the tech companies, in many cases they control those tech companies. Right? Think of the corporate nexus.
It's crazy.
Think about BlackRock. Think about
Well,
all right.
Google.
I don't want to go too far into
Google was literally funded and incubated by the CIA, the NSA, and DARPA.
Yes, I know that. And so is Microsoft.
Crazy.
Yep.
Completely batshit nuts when you go and you realize that Sergey had CIA, NSA people visiting him like monthly.
Sure.
And the technology came straight from DARPA. Like it sounds like such a crazy conspiracy.
No,
I read this.
No, it makes total sense though.
Yeah, no, it does.
It makes total sense because if you can have keystroke by keystroke surveillance of everyone, right? That's what they wanted. That's what they wanted with Microsoft. That's what they wanted with the big tech companies. And ironically, the technology for doing that, from all accounts, much of it was reverse engineered from ET materials. But they didn't let out the energy systems that would eliminate poverty and human suffering and save the biosphere. They let the things out that would enable them to have the uber surveillance state we have today, mostly through the private sector. And, if people said the government were doing these things, but instead you click on an I agree on all your tech platforms and you're giving the corporate titans who are interfacing with the intelligence community carte blanche to everything you're doing.
It's like a cutout.
It is a cutout.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's to anyone who really analyzes this, it's obvious. And that's another question about, our freedoms and privacy and much of the constitutional protections.
Right.
And I keep coming back to that because whether it's here or anywhere else in the world, if we don't have the rule of law, then we're in the jungle. And on this issue that then has sort of infiltrated many other sectors of our society, we don't have freedom and the rule of law. I always tell people, they brag about us having a free market economy. I go, oh, really? When the most important breakthroughs of the last 100 years in science and technology that would completely turn this planet into a paradise with free energy and all kinds of technologies have been ruthlessly suppressed up to and including killing people, right? No, we don't have a free market. We have a managed economy.
Right.
But so what the public needs to understand is we need to evolve out of that 100 years of nonsense and to this whole transformative new golden age. I mean, the new president's calling it that. Well, you're not going to do just a golden age based purely on drilling more oil out of the ground. You've got to create a golden age by letting our society advance both technologically, but also in our understanding of consciousness and spirituality, and that we're not alone in the universe, and do it in a way that doesn't cause everyone to go running for the door and jumping off bridges because we're being invaded by aliens.
I would love to see Trump do one of your CE5.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, maybe. Well,
I want to see him meditate and kind of communicate with these beings.
No, I think, look, you know, I'm completely nonpartisan because I have to be. I've worked through many administrations and members of Congress. Luckily, on this issue, in the Congress, it's very nonpartisan currently. The people who are interested.
Which is interesting.
Yeah, and it should be that way because it's not just the United States. I'm dealing with countries all over the world and leaders all over the world on this, frankly. I won't say which ones, but it needs to be a global understanding that transcends the usual idiotic fracture lines of murderous monkeys fighting over every little division we can find, right? I think we have to go beyond that in our thinking. And on something like this, it can't just be a partisan or even just an American issue. It really needs to be a global issue. And that's never happened. There have been attempts. You know, the original Disclosure Project event was supposed to happen at the UN General Assembly in 2001. And the UN Secretary General was threatened, Kofi Annan. He was absolutely threatened. He says, if you do this, there'll be no more funding for the United Nations. So we had to do it at the National Press Club. And his right-hand guy called me up and says, Dr. Greer, we cannot do it here at the UN. So,
whoa,
that was 24 years ago in May.
So we got off track again. We were talking about CE5, and I was asking you, when you're inviting these extraterrestrials into the space in your meditation and you're interfacing with them, what is the communication?
So it runs the gamut. Almost any weird thing you can imagine has happened. We've had fully materialized craft appear and disappear. We've had like that one ET that appeared between two people and then vanish. We've had unusual electromagnetic signals come through our electronic sensor systems. So like we'll have magnetometers and other equipment out there, and they will override the circuitry and start communicating through them. Very strange. And some of it's very repeatable sequences that we've recorded, almost like Arecibo without the billion-dollar telescopes. You know, it's just
repeatable. How? Like you can
a sequence, a pattern that repeats that would not naturally occur or would not happen from a man-made source. And of course, many people have. It will be deep in meditation and get an override vision of a craft or a person, and say, "Oh, I'm sensing something in the northwest sky at 60 degrees." 5 minutes later, a craft appears there and moves and comes over. So there's a lot of precognitive capabilities that develop when you develop the consciousness.
Any like direct telepathic communication?
Yes, all the time. Yeah.
And what is the context of it?
It runs the gamut, but it's for many people who, I know this is my experience, is that they're making it quite clear they're here for very good reason. But a lot of it is also laden with some warning of where we are, and that our civilization is at a point where it needs to either change directions, or it's going to face some really terrible outcomes. And it's not a threat. It's just like, this is where you are. And it's sort of like the Hopi prophecy, where one line terminates and the other one goes on forever. If you know the Hopi prophecy, Native American.
Right.
It's sort of like that. That is a theme that comes up a lot. And I think we are at that point where we're going to have to transition. If we continue to think in the same paradigm of division and war and conflict, it sounds like we're using machine guns and tanks. We have not only thermonuclear, but these other technologies that are covert. It's not sustainable to live like this. And nor is it sustainable for the Earth's biosphere to have 8 billion people living like we did in the 1800s, burning stuff, right? So there's very frequently a sort of Earth-based environmental message that comes through about the dangers, not only geopolitically, of endless war with these technologies, but also what we're doing to the oceans and the atmosphere, and genetic mutations and cancer rates.
Yeah.
That all of this is a consequence of having suppressed for 100 years breakthroughs in technology that would have moved us onto another path.
Right.
So that's what we call the documentary The Lost Century.
Yeah.
Because there's a lost century of social and technological evolution, but also with that, sort of spiritual evolution. Because what happens when a world no longer is in want and fighting over scarce resources? I think the work week will drop to 10 or 15 hours a week. People will have extraordinary amount of time for creative pursuits and the pursuit of higher states of consciousness and meditative and what have you. Hopefully not everyone's spending all their time on YouTube looking at kitty cats playing the piano, but that might happen too. But
I think there's two main drivers. There's fear of death, and I think there's sex. I think those are the two main drivers of our civilization and where we're going right now. There's a great quote from this show Westworld, where he's saying the human intellect is like peacock feathers. The human psyche is like peacock feathers. It's an elaborate mating call. Everything from the Mona Lisa to the Eiffel Tower to the Brooklyn Bridge, the Statue of David, all it is an elaborate mating call. Some of the best creations and pieces of artwork in human history. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of what drives our innovation and our
part of it.
Our drive to make more money, to get better things, to drive a nicer car, to have a bigger house. And it seems like if we didn't have that, if we were genderless and we didn't fuck each other to reproduce, then maybe we would be on a different trajectory.
Well, I don't think it's either or either. I mean, I think you can have a body and a planet that's physical and also pursue higher states of consciousness and spirituality. I don't think the asceticism is the way. I don't think you deny the one, but you add to that a higher conscious understanding and spirituality. And I think that is the balance. There's sort of like these inherent tensions and contradictions that exist in the modern era and has for many, many times. But one of the features you mentioned earlier of the P3 or psionic operators, when you mentioned that some of these areas that we would call primitive, but they're living more in touch with nature, have this innate ability, it harkens back to the Aboriginals in Australia that had what was called dream time. And they would literally have lucid dreams at night, communicate with each other, and have meetups with no telephones or smoke signals or anything. And so in many civilizations that we would dismiss as primitive, that was just part of the natural order. Western civilization coming into science and through the scientific revolution, and also rejecting the superstitions and excesses of the Middle Ages and whatnot, sort of threw the baby out with the bathwater. So I see a time where we'll go forward as a high-tech civilization, but at the same time an increasingly conscious and enlightened civilization, both. And I think that's the sort of balance where you become a very advanced civilization because primacy is with your conscious evolution. The world is as you are, as it says in the Vedas. The world we see is a reflection of what our level of consciousness and thoughts are. And so I think that can evolve. There's no reason why we have to be stuck in the current state of things. Now, change is difficult. Most people don't like change or adventures. I love adventures and change, but it's something that if we stay, it's like the old Chinese saying, unless we change directions, we're likely to end up where we're going. And I say, look, where are we going? You're going to hell in a handbasket right now. Not just geopolitically, but in terms of tensions and wars, but also with the earth and the environment and poverty. Do you know the Economist a couple years ago had an article, 3 billion people on Earth don't even have energy to cook their food. So they're cutting out the brush and making deserts appear and cutting down the rainforest. 3 billion of the 8 billion. So there's no way to have a peaceful world or a just world with the zero-sum game of the current energy system. This becomes very clear. But as Patrick David told me the other day, if you bring these out, there are so many powerful interests. You're talking about hundreds of trillions of dollars in aggregate impact. So, and that was the mistake of 100 years ago. If these technologies had been brought out when there were only 2.5 billion people on the earth, and very few of those people had electricity and cars, it would have been a natural evolution. Now, we're either headed towards a very bad situation globally, geopolitically and environmentally, geophysically, or we have to bring these out, which will be admittedly very disruptive. You talk about a disruptive technology. So how do we do that? Well, it's going to have to be very smart and very managed. And so these are the complexities that, to be honest with you, world leaders and the President and the National Security Council need to be discussing urgently. And what I'm concerned about is that it seems that in the next year or two, this is all going to get disclosed. And when I meet with senior government officials, which I do quite often, they don't know anything about the subject, or what they do know has been some blended false information that has gaslit them in the wrong path. And this frightens me. I mean, because knowledge is power, and if you don't have it, you're going to be manipulated into all the wrong decisions. And I think we need to have our leaders here and abroad brought up to speed on this in a serious way, which is, what I should be doing, and am trying to do. What I really ought to do is retire. But I'm tired and I'm getting old. But
go relax on those 600 acres.
Oh, we do. I take time for that. I work out a lot. And, I was almost killed in an accident about 15 months ago. And,
oh, shit.
Oh, yeah.
What happened?
I don't talk about it. It was a mess. Someone saw through the seat of my bicycle, mountain bike, and it snapped off. And my left leg came off. My left foot came off. The bones were in the air. This shoulder was ripped off. My abdomen split open. I had 4 surgeries.
What?
Oh, yeah. I even believe the things I've had happen to me.
Holy shit.
It was bad. It was the worst I've had. And, in the 90s, I had 3 people on my team killed. 2 by electronically induced cancers, and the former CIA director, Bill Colby, who was going to help us bring these energy technologies out, they just wet worked him in the river south of D.C., made it look like an accident. So, this is serious stuff.
They literally tried to kill you on your bike.
Oh, I think it was more of a speed bump, slow me down. It was 3 weeks after I got back from the black site in the chopper, where I filmed the underground opening, where some of the Lockheed objects come up from an underground facility and are tested, and I handed that over to the Senate Intelligence
You gotta
Committee.
be so paranoid, man.
No, I'm not. Not at all. No.
All these people that you've worked with have been whacked.
No, your paranoid implies that you'd be afraid of all this. But I think the saving grace, even though I was raised an agnostic atheist, of having had that near-death experience when I was 17.
Not afraid of death?
I'm not afraid of that because
Really?
I don't like being tortured. I don't want to be injured. I don't want to have a life of misery, which is what they've made my life a miserable thing. But no, being without this, physical body and being in the worlds of the conscious light that I experienced, no, that's a beautiful thing. I don't have a death wish, but I'm also not afraid. It's sort of like the old Shambhala warriors of old.
If they were
spirit warriors.
Why haven't they? I mean, I would imagine like all this stuff that you're doing, and you've been doing this for so freaking long.
Yeah.
I can't believe they haven't tried to take you out yet.
Well,
other than the bicycle incident.
Oh, I've had other things. I had metastatic malignant melanoma at the same month that a member of Congress and my right-hand assistant got cancers. I almost died. That was in 96, 7, something like that. But, yeah. I think Colby was killed 95, 96. Bill Colby, the CIA director. But
How was he killed?
well, he allegedly was out canoeing on a
I've heard this story.
But his son thought he committed suicide. But he was working with a colonel and with a member of my team to hand over one of these 0-point quantum generators with about $50 million in seed money so we could get it out, open source it, and get it out to the public. And the week he was going to meet with a member of my board, they found him floating down the Potomac. But it's an unsolved murder, but we know what happened. His best friend came to my friend's funeral, Sherry's funeral, and said, we both have had terrible losses, but can't look back. So.
Going back to the angels and demons stuff, have you heard of the Varginha, Brazil incident?
Yes, I have.
That thing smelled like sulfur. And in the Bible, it talks about demons smelling like sulfur.
But here's the other problem. I'm not an expert on that case. But the question is, was it ET? Was it human induced? Or was it from another dimension? And
have you ever seen anything like that? You know all about the alien species, right? You know all about the catalog. The guy said there's 69 different ones.
Oh yeah, and our team has had experiences with a huge variety.
And you've never seen anything like that one with the red eyes, the Varginha one?
No. And one of the questions I always have is, given what I know about what human electromagnetic field experimentation is done. There's a physicist I'm working with. He's down near the Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville. Space Flight Center, Marshall Space Flight Center. He has his own skiff I've been in, and his lower level of his house is also a skiff, a secure compartment information facility. And these guys have created like toroidal electromagnetic systems where they will tap into the ninth ring of hell or whatever, and some creature will be 3D running around the lab.
What?
And it sounds absolutely batshit crazy, and it is, but it's true. So whatever you can imagine, Ben Rich, the week he died, was talking to a friend of mine, Jim Goodall, who's a well-known aerospace historian, and said, and Jim was pushing on this issue about what Lockheed Skunk Works had. He said, well, anything you can imagine that you've seen on Star Trek, we've already done at the Lockheed Skunk Works, and it's not at Area 51. It's out in the desert underground. And that is true. And I've been over that facility. Not long ago, right before I was critically injured. But so there are people who have surfaced describing some of those. Well, what does that mean? It means that the capabilities of this covert human group could stage anything. And this is why people say, well, you're the biggest skeptic I ever heard. You don't believe it. I said, well, I'm not saying there aren't genuine extraterrestrial, non-human intelligence, but there's all this other stuff. And all this other stuff gets really complicated. And it makes sense once you unpack 70 or 80 years of super advanced engineering and science and technology from studying this area of physics. And one of the big mistakes everyone makes is they don't give enough credit to the genius of the people who worked on those programs. Like this gentleman I just referred to, he's redacted in what we're making available to the public, but he's not redacted for some other folks. Highest IQ, one of the highest IQs of anyone I've ever met on Earth. And what I have found is that people of very high capabilities, they're tapped either right out of college or in high school even, and brought in because they have such amazing aptitude. And there's a process for screening for that. And It's a real process, and they're looking for people with extraordinary talents and IQs and abilities. So I always tell people the smartest people I've ever met are not at Harvard, MIT, or Caltech, or whatever. They're in covert operations and corporate and some government. And those guys are amazingly brilliant. And they're highly incentivized to study this and figure out different applications. And I think people grossly underestimate that. And because they underestimate it, they're constantly being deceived and tricked by human phenomenon, human events, and weird stuff, and thinking it's something it isn't. And that's what happened with the Skinwalker Ranch. There was an innate phenomenon there. I don't think it was extraterrestrial. I think it was extra-dimensional. And a bunch of guys operating with Robert Bigelow and the intelligence community set up some electronics that ran the rancher off, so they forcibly bought it virtually. And then they set up all these weird electromagnetic phenomenon there, and I know how they did it. And I have someone who was embedded in that team who's described it. Same thing with the Bradshaw Ranch near Sedona. Recently there was someone who works with Elizondo on a podcast talking about, yeah, that's an alien, but I've had my people scouted out. They're guys all dressed in black down below a hill, and it's a complete black site. I don't know if it's CIA or corporate, but so this happens all the time. If you have an area that has an innate, some would say a portal, but an innate phenomenon going on, those will get taken over and turn into a black site that's human. And then the public gets gaslit and deceived about all the phenomenon there. So it's more trickery.
You're saying that they will deliberately use their tricks to make it seem like there's some crazy fuckery going on there, and it's some sort of interdimensional portals with witches and all this stuff. And then that will force the ranchers to to flee, and they can buy it.
Terrifying.
And they can keep doing that stuff.
They ran off the people who owned the Bradshaw Ranch. Same thing with Skinwalker. Now there's a new owner. I don't know him, but I knew the people who got it after the rancher was terrified and run off. And they can do things through normal electric wires, power lines, that they can put a signal down, and all of a sudden some creepy thing happens, and apparition appear and disappear. This is the high end of what we call the stagecraft or tradecraft.
Stagecraft.
Yeah, staging things. And one of the problems with ufology and with this whole subject is that you really can't begin to even make a judgment call on what you're looking at, unless you unpack what the human capabilities are. And then you can begin to put it into categories and get some discernment. But it's a very difficult thing to do. And, in 1991, I was at a conference, and a CIA guy, old guy, he looked like the cigarette man in what's that show, X-Files. Because some of those episodes they took from my early work. And we were walking along, and he said, let's walk along the beach. And he said, look, the truth is so much stranger than any fiction. We can sell the fiction and people will believe it. But if you tell people the truth, they won't believe it. And it's less believable than the fiction. And it is. Yeah. So that's been a real conundrum.
Fiction has to make sense. Truth doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. And the truth on this is such a tangled web. And it's been done deliberately because it has the ability to then confuse the picture, but also create this specter of fear, where the long-term goals can be fulfilled. My concern is that disclosure, I wrote a paper in 1999 called, it's on our website, When Disclosure Serves Secrecy, meaning the secret government operations. And if this issue gets disclosed the way it currently is on track to be, it'll be a war of the worlds, panic in the aisle. It'll be 1,000 times worse than COVID.
The way it's on track to be disclosed.
Yes, where you have the people who keep going up to Congress and the White House and other places and conflating man-made, frightening things like abductions and villages being blown up with extraterrestrial threat or NHI threat. And they're deliberately commingling. No one is making this discernment between a bunch of psyops and covert technologies masquerading as ET. No one is doing that. In fact, the dominant paradigm is to call all of it one thing. And in that calling it one thing, it makes people conclude there is a threat and we need to fight it. So let's go to DEFCON 1. Let's go to Independence Day, the movie. Let's go to War of the Worlds. Mm-hmm. So I think this manipulation is 99% of what people hear. And I don't really, honestly, right now, if you were to put me under sodium truth serum, I don't.
We got some.
Do you? Oh, good. Go for
Steve,
it.
lock the doors. All right.
I really don't see that right now, as things stand as of this moment, that there is a critical mass of people who are able to come forward and not be captured, let's call it, by that narrative. Trapped by that narrative. Now, it even gets more spooky when you start dealing with senior people in government who have not been read into this, who are brand new to this. And we'll go in with information, and then right after us will be a disinformation team that goes in.
Yeah.
Like clockwork. So, and I'm a private civilian, and those people go in with credentials from the Pentagon, right? Or some intelligence agency. So, it's daunting, but I don't think we should give up on getting the truth out and exposing the lies and the cover-up, but also the trickery. But I don't see right now there's a lot of bandwidth, let's just say.
So you were alluding to earlier when you were mentioning Elizondo. He is behind this whole threat narrative.
It's mixed. I mean, he's actually evolving a little bit off of that because he needs to, and that's been exposed. But I think one of the reason he initially emerged was to be sure that 2 or 3 major false narratives came out. One was, we don't have anything that's man-made that could be this, when 80% of what people are saying are man-made, covert. Okay, that was one message. The other was that it's a threat to the national security, which it is, but not from out there in space. It's the threat is within. I mean,
Got it.
Right? But he was
rogue organization.
The rogue secret government organization is the threat. It's treasonous, it's traitorous, it's murderous, it's unconstitutional, it's criminal. So that narrative it is to say what I just described, when disclosure serves secrecy. Yes, this is real. It's all coming out. The UFOs are real, which everybody's known forever. But they're a threat. And we don't have anything that can fly like that. Now, luckily, in the last 2 or 3 years...
Does Elizondo say that we don't have anything like this?
Yes, he did initially. Not anymore.
Not anymore.
And neither is Grush, and neither is Fravor and others. But that was something that I was forcefully in the public saying that is a falsehood. And I would go to senators and congressmen and say, no, that is wrong. And that is a lie and a damnable lie. Because if you believe that, then a priori, you have to think that all the horrible things that have happened have also been at the hands of the ETs, when they've been at the hands of a CIA Special Operations team, right? Or SOs, Special Operators.
Right.
So I think that was the thing that concerned me the most. Now, I'm hoping, I don't have any grievance against any individual, honestly. I mean, mostly I don't know them. I'm more concerned about the human future and human consciousness being polluted with a false narrative that leads us into this dystopian future of endless war and expanded war into space and all this stuff. Because that's how you get to Armageddon. That's how you get to a catastrophic conclusion. So that's my big concern. And I think this is why I don't care who you are. I'm going to speak the truth about it. There's an old saying, I speak the truth whether it gives you counsel or offense. So that's the ER doc in me. If you got a brain tumor, I'm not going to tell you have a migraine. Right? So that's just me. But, and it makes me very controversial and very unlikable, which I don't care. I'm not running for mayor of Crazy Town Ufology either, by the way. So I couldn't care about that.
Sure.
I care about what the truth is, but also how the truth is articulated that doesn't result in some just furtherance of the agenda of the secret group. Because what would be, I mean, this is their dream, is to let this come out and pivot the whole world onto a path of needing Big Brother to run endless war and offensive and defensive operations against NHI, right? That's been the plan. And I, right now, I will say that the weight of the thrust of how this is being brought forward, if you look at media reports, social media, that is the thrust of what's happening. We're trying to bend the curve towards something truthful, but also a positive outcome for humanity and for the United States, because the United States is the crown jewel in these covert secret programs. And many of our big corporations are tied into these in a compartmented special projects divisions, and a lot of them. So I think we have to figure out how to do this, but this needs to come out where it's, and I basically in here there's you're going to laugh, it's a draft speech for the president or other world leaders to give that I've written.
Why would I laugh about that?
Because people go, really? It's kind of, I said, but it has to be, this coming out, you cannot speak about this with, well, let's just blow them out of the sky, right? That kind of thing. So, this is dangerous, the kind of talk that attends the disclosure discussions. It leads to a catastrophic outcome for the Earth and humanity. And there's one other risk that's a little bit more ominous. And that is, there are 3 different people I'm working with that don't know each other that have been in comm centers, communication centers, where somehow they have intercepted communications from NHI.
From extraterrestrials.
Yeah. That they're getting quite fed up with the fact that we are taking their technologies and using it against them, and that has reached a point where we are a threat, not just to ourselves, but to out there. So people are grossly underestimating how those covert programs are threatening Earth, because not that these civilizations are hostile, but they certainly are not going to let a rogue group of psychopaths threaten other worlds. So if we don't get this under control, it'll have to be brought under control. But the worst case scenario, everyone says, why don't the aliens just fix this? I said that would be the worst case scenario, because if that happens, it'll be portrayed as an alien invasion.
Wouldn't the aliens
and
just...
they're too smart for that.
Yeah, the aliens are smart. They're way smarter than us. They have to be.
IQ's 400, north of 400.
So why wouldn't they just quietly go after those people and just shut them down?
There would be no way to do that without it also being portrayed by their lackeys in government and the media as an alien invasion. So
yeah, I'm saying quietly do it, so no one else
knows. There's no way
knows.
to quietly do this, my friend. I mean, if you start looking at the map in here, and the list of corporations, sites, facilities, the trillions of dollars involved with this, that ain't going to happen where it wouldn't be noticed. Now, humans can get and here's what I think, here's one of the messages, is that we need to fix our own mess here. And there's no reason we can't. I think it's sort of a weird cosmic codependency to think that someone from out there is going to land here and fix our problems. I mean, how well did that work in Afghanistan, right? Oh, we're going to go in and nation build, and they're right back to warlords and nonsense. It's got to come from the people, right? Now, I don't necessarily say the leaders, the people. The people will lead, the leaders will have to follow. But we become very passive people. And I think we have to not be so passive. I think the people need to speak up, stand up, articulate, and hopefully exhort our leaders to do the right thing. I grew up I was born in 1955, so I remember I grew up in the South, very poor. And, my grandmother's Cherokee, my father's half native, and they were called half-breeds. And I have a twin sister who looks very native. But at that time there was Jim Crow. in the South. There was still segregated water fountains, all that. And I remember how weird that was. I mean, I was 4, 5, 6, and I'd go to a water fountain where there was no line, and a little old lady would grab me and say, "Don't drink out of that one. That's for," I think they said, "colored people," or something like that.
Yeah.
And I went, because I was in, my parents were not all racist. I went, "Well, is the water different? Is it?" It was like this magical system, this racist system. And I saw that evolve, and I had an African-American girlfriend in high school. I was got run over by a bunch of racists who did not like that. And, but that all changed, not because the president and Congress changed it. It happened because of Bayard Rustin and Martin Luther King Jr. and there was a movement that made that happen, right? So I think people forget that big changes in society rarely come from the top down. It comes from the people up.
Sure.
And this is that lesson is lost on most people today because most people just sit around looking at their phones and don't do anything. But I remember that era, and I remember how different. I mean, things aren't perfect now with race relations, but boy, it's a big difference from the 50s and 60s when I was a kid. And imagine having an African-American girlfriend in North Carolina in 72 or 3, So I think that, progress can happen, but it's a lot of hard work and a lot of sacrifice, and people have to stand up and be heard. And that's part of what the whole disclosure movement has been about. When I started, people don't realize that we started the whole disclosure movement in the 90s. It's now, even the word disclosure is used by the New York Times. But we started that in the mid to late 90s.
Yeah.
Right. But
now, obviously, I think you've said it before, but you believe that organizations, whether, I don't know if you were talking about the government or if you're talking about these rogue groups, have possession or captive alien bodies.
Yeah, they have living ones as well.
They have living ones, and who is this? Is this the government, or is this rogue organization?
That's the rogue government. It's the secret government, and those are in places that need to be, let's call, liberated. And
do you know where they are?
I'm not precisely. I have a very good idea. So one of the things we have mapped are the underground entry points, and then the connectivity. Say you have the Edwards complex. And then you have east of there what's called the Ant Hill. And those are entry points into underground subterranean facilities or bases. But they connect underground to Nellis and out to the northern net. So it's an underground, that's what they call it, an ant hill. If you go to an ant
There's tunnels.
farm, you go in and there are all these connections, right? So we have a very good idea of where those are, and some of the whistleblowers we're working with know even more. And that needs to be provided to people in the U.S. government so that they can get control of those. And there are some very brave men I'm working with who have been special forces guys who are prepared to go in and get those facilities under control and also to liberate those people.
That's crazy too. If these things are so smart and so advanced, how are they going to let one of their own be captive by us?
Well, that's a lot of people say that, but just because you're advanced doesn't mean terrible things don't happen. I mean, technically you could throw a bunch of spears by cavemen into the rotors of a Sikorsky helicopter and jam it up and have it crash. So, bad things happen. Of course, being a trauma guy, you just see the weirdest things happen. So just because they're very advanced, people conflate that with being infallible.
Right.
Well, I think God's infallible, but certainly no individual person or civilization's infallible. So this concept that just because they're extremely high-tech and bright mean they're infallible, no. Now, is it that often that it happens? No, it doesn't. The one site I was over, I was told there were 1 or 2 ET craft per year downed. And I went over 2 black sites. And so, 2 to 4 a year over a big area of that part of the desert. So it's not like they're dropping out of the sky like flies, is what I'm saying. It's still terrible. But then remember, we have sites like that all over the world. Outback of Australia, South America, all around. And it's still tragic, and it shouldn't be happening. And when there are ones that are living, they just don't flat out kill them. They would prefer to interrogate them and keep them. And so my understanding is that there are a number of ETs that are in captivity and are still living. One guy euphemistically called them refugees. I think not. They're prisoners. But, so I think that is another, humanitarian effort that should happen at some point where they're freed.
And how many different versions or species of these things do you think we have? And have you ever seen any of them in person?
I've not seen living ones in captivity in those bases. No, I've seen ETs, but they're not, to my knowledge. I've never heard anyone describe the variety of them. I know that in the crash retrievals, now we have 122 documented crash retrieval events that are in. Part of them are in here, but in our archive. DPIarchive.com, all of them are in there. And they range from ones that are a foot and a half tall to some that are 8-10 feet tall, and all kinds of different, we would just say, genetic expressions. But they seem to all have a head, 2 arms, and 2 legs. But
Interesting.
But beyond that, there's just an infinite variety.
What about the mantis ones?
Well, that one that was the healer, when you see him is sort of a triangular head, and they're known as really extraordinary healers. I mean, they have some amazing healing capabilities.
That one right
this,
there?
This guy.
That's a mantis?
Yeah. What some people would call it sort of a triangular head. You can see in a sort of, you can outline it. If I had my cursor, I could do it. But remember, this is in complete darkness in the wilderness up on a mountain in Arizona. This was